Before we dive into today's story, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters and all upcoming releases on this channel. There are plenty of other stories waiting for you as well, so after this one, feel free to explore the rest. And if you enjoy what you hear, share the video with others. It helps the channel grow and brings more stories your way. Now let's begin. Olivia Marsh had grown used to the heaviness in her chest. It settled there every morning as predictably as the faint hum of traffic outside her apartment window, as familiar as her own breath. The ache wasn't dramatic or sharp or loud. It was the persistent kind, the one that came from too many decisions made out of desperation, too many nights of trying to stretch a paycheck until it snapped in her hands. Her apartment in Boise wasn't much, just a cramped two-bedroom on the edge of a neighborhood that had been slowly eroding from the inside out. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors argue about overdue bills or shout at their television shows. The fridge hummed louder than it should. The beige carpet had long since surrendered to stains and frayed edges. Yet Olivia tried, every day, to make it seem a little brighter for Jason. His drawings, bright landscapes filled with spaceships, and improbable animals covered the refrigerator door, held up by mismatched magnets she'd collected over the years. They were the brightest thing in the room. It was still dark outside when her alarm went off, although she had already been awake for several minutes, mind churning through a list of unpaid bills and overdue notices. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Jason, and pulled on her warehouse uniform-faded navy pants, a thick sweatshirt, and boots that had begun to wear at the seams. The air outside was cold, stinging her cheeks as she walked to her car. Her old sedan coughed twice before the engine finally caught, sounding as weary as she felt. The warehouse sat on the outskirts of town, a massive metal building lit by pale, buzzing lights. Inside, conveyor belts rattled, forklifts beeped as they reversed, and her supervisor barked instructions from across the floor. Olivia worked the early shift 4 in the morning until noon, stacking and scanning boxes, lifting more weight than her back could handle, and surviving on vending machine coffee. Her arms ached before sunrise most days, and she had stopped bothering with makeup long ago. It didn't matter in a place like this. Everyone here had the same exhausted eyes. When she drove home later that morning, sunlight finally cutting through the gray winter clouds, she tried to shake off the numbness that came with her routine. She took the stairs 2 at a time, key already in hand, and tried to muster the right kind of energy to greet her son. Jason was 10 old enough to sense when she was stressed, but still young enough to believe her when she told him things were going to be okay. She wished she believed it too. Inside the apartment, she found him sitting at the small kitchen table, legs swinging, cereal bowl in front of him. He grinned when he saw her, and the tension in her chest loosened just a little. She ruffled his hair, ignoring the exhaustion pulling at her shoulders, and nudged him toward his backpack. She walked him to the bus stop, holding his hand until the last moment, wondering how much longer he would let her do that. On the walk back, the weight returned in full. A stack of envelopes waited in their mailbox utilities, a water bill, a medical statement from an old injury Jason had suffered at school, and one more notice from the apartment management reminding her that rent was overdue. Again. She carried the stack upstairs like it was a box of bricks. She sorted through the envelopes at the kitchen table, each one making her shoulders tighten a little more. The medical bill was worse than expected. The water bill had late fees. The rent notice was printed in aggressive red ink. There wasn't a single envelope she could open without holding her breath. At the bottom of the pile was one she didn't recognize. Thick cream paper, embossed lettering, a return address from a law office in Missoula. For a moment, Olivia assumed it was a mistake, or maybe some kind of scam. Nothing good ever came from envelopes that looked this official. She set it aside, intending to open it after she ate something, but lunch ended up being a half-burnt slice of toast she barely tasted, and the envelope remained unopened until late that evening, after Jason had gone to bed. When she finally slid a finger under the seal, she didn't expect her life to shift. But as soon as she saw the words "estate notification," she sat up straighter. The letter informed her that a distant relative, her grand-uncle, Edward Marsh, had passed away 3 months earlier. The name struck a faint chord in her memory. She remembered her father mentioning Edward once, maybe twice, in the scattered way people mention relatives who live so far away that they might as well live in another century. Edward had been a quiet man, a loner who preferred mountain living to city life, a man who didn't visit for holidays, who showed up in old family photo albums wearing heavy boots and a stoic expression. The letter said he had left her his property, a house and land, in the Selway Bitterroot Mountains. Olivia reread the page several times. It didn't make sense. Her family never had money. No one ever left inheritances. But the letter was clear. She was the sole beneficiary. The property included a cabin, several acres of forest, and all the contents of the structures on the land. She would need to meet with the attorney to finalize ownership. But legally, as of the moment Edward died, it already belonged to her. She sat back in her chair, letter trembling in her hands. It felt like a cruel joke, like the universe offering a lifeline that might turn out to be a rope with a rock tied to the end of it. The property could be worthless. It could be a collapsing building in the middle of nowhere that she'd never be able to sell. But the possibility that it might be worth something enough to pay off bills, enough to buy a little breathing room, was enough to make her hope, which only made her more afraid. She spent the next hour researching the area online, but information was scarce. The Selway Bitterroot Wilderness was remote, no cell service, barely any roads. Maps showed winding forest routes, most of them dirt or gravel. Winter travel was discouraged. The cabin had no public listing, no photos, no record of recent ownership transfers. Still, the attorney's letter was clear. She needed to visit the property in person, verify its condition, and sign the documents. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of a future that wasn't suffocating. She could sell the land. Even if the house was a wreck, the land itself might hold some value. A few acres in the mountains could go for good money, especially if a developer wanted it. She made the decision late that night, sitting on the floor with her laptop warming her legs. She would go. They would go. It would be a short trip too, maybe 3 days. Jason would think it was an adventure. They needed one. The next morning she called in to request unpaid leave. Her supervisor sighed loudly but approved it, warning her that she was already on the thin ice. Olivia pretended not to hear the threat buried in his tone. Instead, she packed bags for herself and Jason, warm clothes, flashlights, a first aid kit, canned food, a toolkit she'd barely used, and roadside flares. She filled the car with gas and printed out directions, since she knew GPS would likely fail in the mountains. Jason hopped into the passenger seat with the kind of excitement she wished she could feel. He peppered her with questions about the mountains, about the cabin, about what they might find there. Olivia smiled as she drove, keeping her answers light. She didn't want him worrying. They passed through farmland, then forests, then long, lonely stretches of highway. The further they got from Boise, the emptier the landscape became. Small towns appeared and disappeared in minutes, clusters of old storefronts, shuttered diners, gas stations with faded signs barely clinging to their frames. Jason pressed his face to the window, fascinated by the changing scenery. After nearly 4 hours, the road narrowed into a 2-lane highway, climbing steadily north. Snow still clung to the shaded areas between trees. The mountains rose in sharp ridges ahead, dark green at their bases and dusted white higher up. Olivia tightened her grip on the steering wheel as the pavement gave way to gravel. Her tires crunched over loose stone. They drove deeper into the wilderness, past a wooden sign that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Jason's chatter faded, replaced by the quiet awe of a child staring at something larger than himself. Olivia felt it too. The trees rose high above them, the kind that seemed older than memory. Light filtered through the branches in pale, trembling beams. When the cabin finally appeared through the trees, she braked slowly, letting the car roll to a stop on the uneven ground. The structure stood on a small clearing, a weathered building with a sagging porch and a stone chimney. At first glance, it looked like every abandoned hunting cabin she'd ever imagined. But as she and Jason stepped out of the car, something felt off. The windows were intact. The porch was swept clean of debris. The door looked recently repaired. And when she pushed it open, the air inside didn't smell like an abandoned structure. It smelled lived in, faintly of dust and pine, but not of rot or neglect. Jason wandered in cautiously, exploring the small living room. The furnishings were simple: an old couch, a wooden table, a few chairs. The fireplace was swept clean, the ashes cleared away. Olivia moved toward the kitchen and paused. Shelves lined with canned goods greeted her. Soups, vegetables, beans, rice. And every expiration date was recent. Confusion tightened her chest. According to the attorney, Edward had lived alone, rarely visited town, and hadn't had guests in years. But the cabin looked as though someone had been there not days ago, but hours, and not carelessly. Everything was arranged with intention, practicality, readiness. She stepped back into the living area, scanning the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Something didn't fit. The cabin gave off a kind of tension, a quiet watchfulness, like someone had prepared it for a return that never happened. Jason tugged her sleeve, pointing toward a section of the kitchen wall where a wooden panel didn't quite match the others. She approached slowly, running her fingers along the edge. The panel shifted under her touch. Behind it was a narrow passage, a hidden door. She hesitated only a moment before pulling it open. Cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of metal and earth. A stairway led downward into the dark. She turned to look at Jason. His eyes were wide, full of curiosity and unease. "Stay here," she said softly. "Just for a moment." She flicked on her flashlight and descended. The steps creaked beneath her weight, but the air grew colder and cleaner the deeper she went. When her boots touched a concrete floor, she lifted the flashlight and froze. This wasn't a root cellar. It wasn't a storage pit. It was something else entirely. A bunker. A real one, with reinforced walls, industrial beams, and metal crates sealed with military-style locks. Ventilation ducts hummed faintly overhead. A generator sat in the corner. Stacks of supplies filled shelves along the walls. This place wasn't abandoned. It was maintained, prepared, as though someone had planned to return. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Her uncle had left her more than a property. He'd left her a secret, one she was suddenly very sure she wasn't ready to understand. But the door was open now, and she knew that whatever lay beneath this cabin was going to pull her deeper into a world she had never imagined existed. And there would be no turning back. When Olivia climbed back up the narrow stairs and stepped into the kitchen again, the world felt narrower. The cabin, which had seemed merely old and strange before, now felt like a shell built over something much larger, much heavier. She closed the hidden panel behind her, her fingers trembling slightly, and turned toward Jason. He stood quietly near the dining table, watching her with an expression that made her heart ache, a mixture of curiosity and worry that he was too young to carry. "There's something down there," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Something like a basement, but different." Jason nodded slowly. He didn't ask questions, which meant he understood instinctively that something was wrong. He had always been sensitive to her moods, picking up on fear even when she tried to hide it. Olivia forced a smile that never reached her eyes. "We're going to take this one step at a time," she said. But even as she spoke, Olivia knew she had already crossed a threshold. Once you discovered a hidden room in a mountain cabin you inherited from a relative who had lived like a ghost, you didn't just forget it existed. They ate dinner, quietly canned soup heated on a small portable stove because she didn't trust the old wiring yet. Jason drifted off to sleep early, curled under a blanket on the couch. The cabin felt too quiet, too watchful, the wind brushing the windows like whispering fingers. Olivia sat at the small wooden table long after the boy fell asleep, sorting through what little information she had. Her uncle Edward had lived alone in these mountains for decades. He had no recent connections, no family nearby, no one who visited, and yet the cabin was stocked, the supplies fresh. Someone had been here recently, someone who wasn't her uncle, and someone who might plan to come back. She waited until she was sure Jason was deeply asleep, then grabbed her flashlight again, steeling herself. If she was going to understand what she had inherited, she had to go back down. This time she descended slowly, counting each step, listening to the faint hum of the ventilation system that still ran, as if maintained by unseen hands. The bunker felt different now that she knew it wasn't a hallucination of fatigue. She approached the closest stack of crates and brushed dust from the stenciled letters. The markings were faded, but readable. U.S. Department of Defense authorized personnel only. The idea alone sent a chill through her. What business did an isolated mountain recluse have with crates marked by federal agencies? She found a crowbar hanging neatly on a hook at the edge of a metal shelving unit. Every tool was in its place, arranged with meticulous order. Her uncle hadn't been careless. He'd been careful, disciplined. This wasn't a man prepping for winter or hiding valuables. This was something larger, something orchestrated. Olivia hesitated before she opened the first crate. It wasn't fear of what she might find. It was fear of what it would mean. Fear that once she lifted the lid, nothing about her life would be simple again. But she pushed the crowbar into the seam, braced her weight, and pried until the nails squealed and the wood split open. Inside lay thick layers of burlap cloth, each parcel wrapped as if meant to withstand time itself. Her breath caught as she peeled back the first layer. It was a bar-heavy, smooth, impossibly dense. Gold, a solid gold ingot stamped with the seal of the Federal Reserve. She lifted it with both hands, shocked by its weight. It felt impossibly heavy, as if the metal carried not just physical mass, but the burden of decades of secrets. She set it down carefully and pulled away more cloth. More bars, dozens of them, lined the crate in neat rows. Gold worth millions. Gold that had clearly never been meant for the public to see. For the first time since opening the crate, Olivia exhaled, her breath trembling. The implications twisted through her mind like wildfire. This wasn't an inheritance. It was a landmine. One wrong step and her life and Jason's could explode. She forced herself to keep going. Under the gold bars was a false bottom. Beneath it lay manila folders, labeled with stamped markings she didn't understand. Eyes only, covered, Operation Cobalt. The words meant nothing to her at first. They felt like relics from spy movies, not real life. But as she opened the first file, the reality hit her with cold clarity. Inside were memos dated as far back as the 1940s, signatures from men who had once shaped national policy, lists of shipment numbers, military requisition forms, requests for asset allocation, pages of transfers approved by high-ranking officials with names she recognized faintly from history books. Operation Cobalt. She whispered the name as if it were a curse. The documents referenced amounts of gold transferred to off-grid strategic caches. Over and over, the same few names appeared, always tied to authorization codes, always approving movement of enormous amounts of federal assets. Some of the files described the movement of people rather than gold individuals marked for relocation, containment, or removal. She read the euphemisms twice, unable to believe what she saw. These weren't old financial records. They were evidence of corruption, of manipulation, of a shadow budget that operated outside congressional oversight, funneling resources into clandestine operations during the Cold War and beyond. And her uncle had been entrusted with a piece of it, or he had taken one, or he had hidden it deliberately. Olivia's stomach twisted. She imagined Edward as a young man, swept into some secretive military position, told to guard a secret he could never reveal. He had lived his life in isolation because he had been hiding something so dangerous, so explosive, that even decades later, it could ruin powerful people. She flipped through another folder. The same signature appeared again and again, stamped on approvals and clearances. Randall Corbin. The name was familiar. She remembered seeing it in the news over the years. A political strategist, a consultant for federal agencies, a man with tremendous influence and spotless reputation. But here in these pages, he looked like a puppeteer pulling strings behind the curtain of history. The idea that someone like Corbin might still be alive, still powerful, still aware of these missing documents made Olivia's skin crawl. She kept reading. Tucked at the bottom of a file was a handwritten note, as if Edward had slipped it in at the last minute before sealing everything away. The handwriting was uneven, as though written with a shaking hand. If someone finds this, I am sorry. I kept the truth because I believe someone had to. I no longer trust that those who built this machine deserve to keep its secrets. If they come for it, they will not leave witnesses. Whoever you are, be careful. The gold is the least valuable thing here. Olivia folded the note again, breathing shallowly. He had known. He had understood the danger and carried it alone for decades. And now she was carrying it instead. Her flashlight flickered slightly. catching the metallic edges of another object beneath the shelves. A footlocker, smaller and older than the others. When she knelt beside it and opened the lid, she found envelopes sealed with wax. Each envelope bore a name Randall Corbin, along with dates stretching across 20 years. Inside were more documents, typed letters discussing neutralizations, reassignments, and dissolutions. This wasn't merely evidence of hidden gold. These were records of human lives erased. Olivia felt a wave of nausea. As she stood, hands shaking, a faint sound reached her, the creak of the cabin floor above, the soft, unmistakable groan of wood under weight. Someone was upstairs. She froze, breath trapped in her throat. It could be an animal, the wind, a shifting board, but her instincts screamed otherwise. She had lived long enough with danger in her life to recognize the quiet, deliberate sound of footsteps. She turned off her flashlight, plunging the bunker into darkness. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she moved silently toward the stairs. Every nerve felt electrified, aware that she was suddenly not alone in this remote place. The wooden steps of the kitchen creaked again above her, just faintly. Whoever was inside the cabin was not her uncle, and they were not a hiker or a ranger or a lost traveler. They were here for the same reason she was, the truth, or perhaps to make sure it stayed buried forever. Olivia's mind raced. She had Jason upstairs, asleep and unprotected. She had to get to him. Her entire body screamed at her to move, to run, to reach him before whoever was in the cabin did. She made her way up the stairs as quietly as possible, stopping at the hidden door. She listened. Silence. Then a soft metallic click. She pushed the panel open just enough to peer through. The cabin was dim, lit only by moonlight leaking through gaps in the wooden boards. Shadows stretched long across the floor. The front door was ajar. It had been closed when she went downstairs. Her breath caught. Someone had come in. Someone had walked across the old floorboards and then stopped. Where were they now? She pushed the panel open wider and slipped out, crouching low. The cabin felt colder, as if the air itself had tightened in anticipation. She scanned the room. Jason was gone. The blanket on the couch was rumpled, tossed aside. His backpack lay on the floor, unzipped. Panic surged through her as she moved silently toward the front of the cabin. She didn't see him, didn't hear him, and her heart hammered so hard she thought it might shatter her ribs. The front door creaked slightly in the wind. Olivia rushed outside, grabbing the cold edge of the doorframe to steady herself. The night was too quiet, too still. Her breath fogged in the air as her eyes adjusted to the darkness. Then she saw him. Jason stood near the edge of the clearing, facing the trees, frozen as if in a trance. And just beyond him, half concealed by the shadow of a towering pine, was a figure, tall, motionless, watching the cabin with a posture too deliberate to be anything but intentional. Olivia's blood turned to ice. She didn't know who they were, or what they wanted, or whether they had seen her emerge from the hidden passage. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had to get Jason away from here, away from this cabin, away from the secrets buried beneath it, before the Watchers decided to act, and before she became the next person erased from a file in a locked footlocker. The forest swallowed the road behind Olivia as the wheels of the stolen SUV tore through the snow. Every branch they passed seemed to lean inward. Every shadow felt like an eye watching them. Every curve of the narrow mountain road felt like a point of no return. Olivia's hands clutched the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles throbbed, but she didn't loosen her grip. Her mind replayed everything: the figure by the tree line, the foreign footsteps in the cabin, the soft metallic click that had called her back up from the bunker. Jason's frightened breaths, the knowledge that whoever had been in the cabin wasn't a curious stranger, but someone searching for the very secrets she had uncovered. Hours passed in a blur of headlights and icy pavement. Jason sat beside her, curled against the door, wrapped in a blanket and trembling with exhaustion. He hadn't spoken much since they left the clearing. His wide, fearful eyes told her he understood enough to feel the weight she carried. She wanted to reassure him, to tell him everything would be okay, but she couldn't force the words out. She didn't know if they were true. They wouldn't be safe until they found someone who knew what to do with the truth she now held in her backpack. Truth that could destroy powerful people if it reached the right hands. The first gas station in miles appeared like a dull, flickering beacon on the edge of a small town. Little more than a weather-beaten shack with a rusted awning and a single pump. Olivia pulled in slowly, surveying the surroundings, checking for signs of anyone who might have followed them. When she saw nothing but empty pavement and drifting snowflakes, she exhaled shakily and killed the engine. Jason slept heavily now, his small fingers still clutching the strap of his backpack as if afraid it might disappear. She brushed a hand over his forehead before gently closing the SUV door and heading for the phone booth on the edge of the lot. Her breath condensed in front of her as she dialed the attorney's number from memory. It rang 4 times before a startled, gravelly voice answered. Beckett sounded older in his exhaustion than he had over the phone earlier that week. She spoke quickly. The bunker, the crates, the documents, the people at the cabin, the gold. Beckett didn't interrupt. When he spoke, his voice had lost all polite detachment. He sounded afraid. He warned her that the project she had stumbled into wasn't just historical, it was ongoing. The men who had come to the cabin wouldn't stop. They wouldn't negotiate. If they believed she had the files, she had already crossed an invisible line. There was no going back to her old life. There was no returning to Boise, no explaining the truth to anyone who might not believe her. The only option was disappearance. But then he gave her the one name that changed everything. Mara Tran, an investigative journalist known for exposing government corruption and surviving the fallout. Someone who had spent years sniffing around Cold War black sites, rumored to have been targeted herself more than once. If there was anyone willing to take on something like Operation Cobalt, it was her. Olivia clung to the name like a lifeline. Beckett recited a number, a burner line. No digital history, no traceable location. Then he told Olivia one last thing, something she would feel echoing in her bones long after the call ended. Don't think of yourself as Olivia Marsh anymore. From this point forward, you're someone they can't find. She hung up without responding, unable to form words around the terror tightening her throat. Her reflection in the booth's fog glass barely looked like her anymore. Her eyes were hollow, her hair tangled, her cheeks pale. She felt both smaller and sharper, like someone scraped down to nothing but instinct and fear. Inside the SUV, Jason stirred when she climbed back in. He blinked sleepily, rubbing his face. "Mom, where are we going now?" She looked at him and forced calm into her voice. "We're going somewhere safe." They headed north, crossing into Canada as dawn broke across the sky in pale silver streaks. At the border checkpoint, Olivia lied with a clarity she didn't know she possessed. A visit to an old friend, a short stay, nothing suspicious. Jason yawned and leaned against her shoulder at just the right moment, which made them appear harmless. The guard waved them through. Hours later, they reached the small cottage where Mara Tran waited. The place was a quiet, unremarkable home tucked into the edge of a pine forest, the kind someone could easily overlook. Smoke drifted from the chimney, and a stack of firewood sat neatly beside the porch. It didn't look like a fortress, but the calmness of the exterior was misleading. Olivia would soon understand how deeply Mara lived beneath the surface of things. Mara opened the door before Olivia knocked, as though she had been standing behind it, listening for the crunch of snow under tires. She was older than Olivia expected, not frail, but seasoned, like someone who had stopped pretending the world was a clean place. Her eyes were sharp and assessing, but kind enough to put Jason at ease as she ushered them inside. The warmth of the cottage felt unreal after the hours of cold. Olivia sank onto the couch as Mara made tea and asked her to talk. So she did. Every detail, every discovery, every gold bar, every document, every footstep in the cabin. Mara absorbed it all, pacing occasionally, tapping her pen against her notebook. When Olivia finished, the room was quiet except for the soft crackle of logs in the fireplace, and Jason breathing softly as he dozed beside her. Mara finally spoke, and her words were heavier than anything Olivia had heard so far. "You found a ghost fund that powered an empire. This isn't just money, it's the shadow of 70 years of covert operations." Olivia didn't speak. She didn't need to. The weight of Mara's words pressed into her chest. Sometime in the afternoon, Naomi arrived, a thin, wiry woman with restless hands and eyes that missed nothing. She carried a backpack filled with laptops and hard drives, the tools of someone who lived in the underbelly of information. If Mara was the voice, Naomi was the hands. They made an unsettling pair, but Olivia felt safer already. The three women spent hours poring over the documents. Naomi's fingers flew across her keyboard as she cross-referenced signatures, traced patterns, uncovered encrypted codes. The more they uncovered, the darker the truth became. Operation Cobalt wasn't simply a Cold War artifact. It was a system that had evolved, mutating into something more sophisticated, more pervasive. The gold caches were real, but they were only one branch of a network designed to maintain financial secrecy across decades. Cobalt-funded operations had supported coups in small countries, influenced elections, paid for covert intelligence work that never saw the light of congressional oversight. But the most chilling revelation was the one Naomi brought to the table as dusk fell over the cottage. 3 names on the documents were still alive. One was now a senior consultant to the Treasury Department. Another sat on the board of a major defense contractor. But it was the third name that made Mara sit down slowly. Randall Corbin, the same man whose signature appeared again and again, authorizing shipments, approving disappearances, overseeing relocations. The man who seemed to have climbed higher every decade, shedding his past like a snake shedding skin. Mara's voice was quiet but sharp. He's not done. He didn't walk away from that world. Men like that don't retire. They reinvent. Olivia felt her stomach twist again. She remembered the figure in the woods, the cold presence watching her. She knew with certainty now that Corbin wasn't a name buried in old files. He was a threat, alive, active, a man accustomed to removing obstacles. And she, holding the last evidence of his crimes, was now the largest obstacle of all. Days began to blur together. They shifted from one borrowed safe house to another, never staying in a single location for long. Mara's network coordinated like a ghost army, supplying them with phones, vehicles, routes, safe rooms. Naomi tunneled into classified archives, tracking Corbin's movements and finding disturbing connections. Wherever funds had vanished mysteriously, wherever a foreign regime had changed hands suddenly, wherever a whistleblower had disappeared, Corbin's fingerprints appeared never directly, but always indirectly, like faint smudges left on glass. As the puzzle pieces fell into place, the danger around them thickened. Twice they saw unmarked SUVs lurking near their safe houses. Once they found footprints in the snow leading toward the back porch of a cabin, only hours after Mara had checked to ensure the area was clear. Twice they had to leave in the middle of the night, waking Jason and fleeing under cover of darkness. Sleep became a luxury. Olivia and Mara took shifts keeping watch. Naomi rotated VPN networks, changing their digital trails every few hours. But despite the constant movement, Olivia felt the pressure closing in. She knew they couldn't run forever. Finally, after nearly a week of planning, Naomi announced she had created a secure, untraceable link that could upload the Cobalt files to dozens of international media outlets simultaneously. Once released, no government agency or private contractor could suppress it. The story would be unstoppable. But they needed every file for maximum impact. Without the final set of records from Edward's bunker, the story would be incomplete. Corbin could claim forgery. He could deny involvement. He could hide behind ambiguity. That was why Olivia found herself standing at the foot of the mountains again, staring up at the road that led back to the cabin she had fled. Returning there felt like willingly walking into the center of a storm, but she knew it was necessary. She couldn't expose a monster without showing the world its claws. She left before dawn, her breath visible in the pale light, her hands trembling around the steering wheel. The forest felt colder this time, as though it remembered her. When she reached the cabin, everything seemed quiet, too quiet. The door was propped open slightly, snow drifting into the entrance. Inside, objects were disturbed, furniture moved, shelves rearranged. Someone had searched for the very papers she needed. She forced herself down the hidden stairs, her flashlight slicing through the dimness. The bunker had been ransacked, crates pried open, shelves overturned. The gold remained untouched, too heavy or too risky to take quickly. But the files had been scattered, folders lying like fallen leaves across the concrete floor. It took hours to find what she needed, a small footlocker shoved beneath a metal shelf. Inside were the most damning documents: disposal orders, relocation logs, signed directives, photographs, evidence not of missing gold, but missing people. Olivia had just enough time to gather everything before she heard the unmistakable sound of a vehicle pulling up outside. She fled through the emergency tunnel behind the bunker and escaped into the forest, racing through the snow until her lungs burned. Hours later, shaking from cold and panic, she returned to the safe house. Jason ran into her arms with a cry of relief. Mara hugged her tightly. Naomi immediately began scanning the documents. "You did it," she whispered. "You found the last piece." But even as they celebrated, a quiet dread settled over Olivia. She sensed the storm drawing closer. Corbin's men would not stop now. They would push harder. They would hunt relentlessly. And when the first hint of surveillance chatter lit up Naomi's screen proof that Corbin's people had found their trail, Olivia realized the countdown had begun. She wasn't just holding evidence. She was holding a fuse, and soon the world would watch it burn. The morning the world began to close in on them arrived quietly, almost unremarkably. Snow fell in slow, delicate spirals outside the safe house windows, coating the forest in a white veil that made everything seem peaceful. But Olivia had learned not to trust peaceful moments. They were always the moments right before something broke. She woke before the others, unable to shake the uneasy feeling that had pressed against her chest all night like an invisible hand. The documents she had retrieved lay spread across the dining table, edges curling slightly from repeated handling. Naomi had spent most of the previous night scanning them, her fingers trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. The light from her laptop still glowed faintly, the screen filled with lines of code and encrypted transfers. Mara slept in an armchair with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her breathing slow but restless. Jason was curled on the couch, holding one of the notebooks Olivia had taken from the cabin. He kept it close, as if the relic of his great-uncle's past offered some kind of protection. Olivia stepped to the window and scanned the tree line, her breath fogging the glass. At first she saw nothing unusual, just snow, branches bending under its weight, in the faint outline of the mountains beyond. But then she saw it, the tiniest glint of reflection, like light bouncing off glass, a lens, a scope, or a camera. Someone was watching. Before she could speak, Naomi appeared beside her, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They found us." Olivia didn't have time to respond before a second reflection flickered deeper in the woods, then a third. Mara jolted awake as Naomi hurried to shut her laptop, gathering cables with trembling hands. Jason sat up straight, confusion flashing across his face. Olivia forced herself to stay calm for his sake. She smiled, soft but steady. "We have to leave again, sweetheart. Right now." Jason didn't argue. He slipped his shoes on automatically, eyes flicking toward the partially opened envelope of documents on the table. Even he understood that whatever was happening outside, it wasn't something a child should ever have to face. Mara grabbed the go bags by the door. They'd been packed for days, ready for this exact moment. Naomi double-checked the encrypted drive and handed one of the duplicates to Olivia. "If we get separated," Naomi whispered, "you finish the upload, no matter what." Her voice was firm, but her eyes revealed fear she tried to hide. Before Olivia could answer, a faint crunch of snow echoed from the ridge beyond the clearing. It was followed by the unmistakable low hum of engines idling. Not one, but several. Mara cursed under her breath. "They're not probing anymore," she said. "They're moving." Olivia peered through the crack in the curtains. Two black SUVs sat partially hidden between the trees. Men in dark tactical gear spilled out, moving with the quiet precision of trained professionals. Contractors. Not government agents, not police. Something in between, deadly and invisible. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to erase. Mara moved quickly toward the kitchen door. "We split," she said. "Two cars, opposite directions. They can't follow both." Naomi nodded, her jaw tight. She shoved a burner phone into Olivia's hand. "Call the number I saved when you're at least 10 miles out." "And Olivia?" She lowered her voice, her eyes sharp. "Don't freeze. Not now." Olivia swallowed hard and nodded. But before they could enact their escape plan, The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the window above the sink. Glass scattered across the counter, and Jason screamed as Mara tackled him to the floor. Olivia dropped behind the couch, heart hammering as another bullet tore through the wall, thudding into the wooden beam behind her. The invaders weren't waiting for them to make the first move. They were pushing aggressively, confident, certain of their advantage. "Take the back door," Mara shouted. "Move!" Olivia lunged for Jason, scooping him into her arms as Naomi grabbed the encrypted drive and slung her backpack over her shoulder. They sprinted for the utility room, where a secondary exit led into the forest. Mara covered them, firing a warning shot through the broken window from her revolver, an almost symbolic gesture that barely slowed the advancing men. "Go!" Mara yelled again. Naomi rushed out first, scanning the tree line before waving them forward. Olivia ducked through the doorway into the biting cold, Jason clinging to her like a lifeline. Snow swallowed their footsteps, muffling the sounds of their desperate retreat. They moved quickly, hearts pounding, breaths ragged in the frigid air. Behind them, more gunshots shattered the quiet. Olivia turned in time to see Mara stumble through the doorway, clutching her side. Naomi shouted her name, racing back toward her, but Mara waved her off with a grimace. "Keep moving," she cried. "Finish the story." More gunfire erupted, and Mara disappeared behind the doorway as Naomi screamed in anguish. Olivia grabbed Naomi's arm with her free hand. "We can't go back," she said. She knew the risk. Naomi froze, torn between fury and grief, but then she nodded, tears streaming down her face, and followed Olivia deeper into the woods. They had rehearsed escape routes, fallback paths, rendezvous points, but fear made the world feel smaller, the forest tighter, every direction the wrong one. It took nearly 20 minutes before they reached the vehicles hidden half a mile away. Olivia shoved Jason into the passenger seat of the Subaru Naomi had borrowed, started the engine, and whispered a trembling thank you when it roared to life. Naomi threw her backpack into the Jeep and started it up as well. The two women looked at each other across the snow, one silent moment filled with everything they couldn't say. Then Naomi whispered, "I'll draw them. You upload." She tore off down the narrow path, tires spinning through the snow, headlights bouncing. Olivia hesitated only a moment before slamming her foot on the accelerator, steering in the opposite direction, tears blurring her vision. The forest whirred past in streaks of white and gray. Jason clutched the dashboard, silent, terrified. Olivia wanted to say something, anything to reassure him, but her voice caught in her throat. They drove in silence until they reached a rest area outside Kelowna, a lonely spot sheltered by a rocky cliff. Olivia's hands trembled as she switched off the engine and checked the rearview mirror. No headlights, no movement, just snow swirling in the wind. Then the burner phone buzzed. A message from Naomi. They hit site 2. "Mara gone. I'm safe. Splitting again. Upload now." Olivia pressed the phone to her forehead, breathing hard. Mara was dead. Naomi was wounded, but alive, and the responsibility now rested squarely on her shoulders. She glanced at Jason, whose eyes were filled with silent, pleading fear. "Stay close to me," she whispered. "We're not done." They climbed out of the car. The air was sharp and cold, burning Olivia's lungs as she moved toward the old ranger station Naomi had mentioned as their contingency point. The station was almost abandoned, dusty, dim, but still wired to a satellite terminal on the roof. She fumbled with her laptop, the encrypted drive, the login sequence Naomi had drilled into her. When the secure server finally connected, she exhaled in relief. She began the upload. 1%, 2%, 7%. The progress bar crept upward with agonizing slowness. Jason hovered behind her, glancing nervously at the dark windows. 20%, 30%. Olivia allowed herself a small, shaky breath. Then she heard the crunch of tires outside. Someone was approaching the station. She spun, heart dropping into her stomach, but it wasn't Corbin's men. Naomi stumbled through the door, blood staining her jacket, face pale and drawn. Olivia helped her sit, but Naomi waved her off, pointing toward the laptop. "Don't stop. Don't look away. Finish it." Olivia nodded and returned to the upload. 50%, 68, 83, 95, then 100. A message flashed across the screen. Files disseminated to all international partners. Mirror servers active. Unauthorized access impossible. Operation complete. Naomi leaned back, closing her eyes. It's done, she whispered. They can't bury it this time. Outside, engines roared. More vehicles approached. Olivia grabbed Jason and shoved him toward the crawl space built into the station floor. Remember what I told you, she said, her voice trembling but firm. Hide. Stay quiet. I'll find you. He hesitated, tears filling his eyes. Promise? She kissed his forehead. Always. He crawled into the space just as the station doors burst open. Men in dark tactical gear stormed inside. Naomi met their advance with fierce defiance, shouting at them that the world knew the truth now. As they closed in, Olivia backed toward the window. She didn't wait to see what would happen next. She threw herself through the glass, hit the snow hard, and scrambled to her feet. The rotors of a helicopter thundered overhead. Searchlights cut through the night. She shielded her eyes as figures rappelled down, shouting her name. It wasn't Corbin's men, it was the interagency response team that Mara had quietly alerted weeks earlier, a contingency she had never explained fully. Strong arms pulled Olivia into the helicopter. Jason was lifted in seconds later, crying but unhurt. Naomi was dragged out last, bloodied but alive, clutching the encrypted drive like a lifeline. As they lifted off, Olivia saw the black SUVs swarming the ranger station. They were too late. The truth was already in motion. It was unstoppable. In Vancouver, the safe house buzzed with activity. Analysts, legal teams, journalists, they all converged to help coordinate the next phase. Naomi was rushed to a secure hospital. Mara's body was recovered and honored by a network of independent journalists she had once mentored. Olivia watched all of it through a haze of exhaustion and disbelief. Jason sat beside her on a couch, wrapped in a blanket, his head resting on her shoulder. Agents filtered in and out of the room, briefing her, asking for her recollections, assuring her that she wasn't alone anymore. One of them, Thomas Green, sat down across from her with a solemn expression. Your testimony, he said, will shape everything that comes next. The hearings, the resignations, the investigations. Olivia's hand tightened around Jason's. I didn't ask for any of this. Green nodded. No one who changes history ever does. In the days that followed, the leak shook the world. International headlines exploded, secret budgets exposed, lost gold caches discovered, Cold War operations debunked. Corbin's name appeared everywhere, dragged from the shadows into the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Olivia eventually stood before a Senate Oversight Committee, her voice steady as she recounted everything. She wasn't a spy or a soldier or a politician. She was a mother who found a door in a cabin and chose to open it. Investigations began. Officials resigned. Arrest warrants went out. Corbin disappeared. His last known location, Zurich, a man who had spent a lifetime hiding, now forced into the very darkness he once controlled. After the hearings, Olivia and Jason relocated to a farmhouse in Oregon. It wasn't grand. It wasn't perfect. But it was theirs. A place without ghosts in the walls or secrets buried beneath the floor. Jason built snowmen in the yard. Olivia drank coffee in the mornings and watched him play. And sometimes, when the wind was quiet and her thoughts drifted, she felt the presence of Edward Marsh, not as a shadow haunting her life, but as a silent figure passing her a torch he had carried too long. One morning, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single note. You did what I never could. It wasn't signed, but Olivia knew who wrote it. She folded it gently and placed it in a small wooden box labeled proof. Proof not of corruption, not of crimes, but proof that choices mattered. Proof that silence was a blade and truth was a light. As winter melted slowly into spring, Olivia and Jason walked along the edge of their field. He pointed at the sky, telling her stories about the shapes in the clouds. She listened, not as a fugitive or a witness or a reluctant hero, but as a mother who had finally come home. Jason looked up at her, his face bright. Do you think people will remember what you did? She knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. No, she said. I think they'll remember why I did it. He smiled softly, and together they continued walking, footsteps weaving a new path through the soft earth. The truth she had carried through the darkest nights now lived out in the open, exposed, unstoppable, irreversible. Some stories weren't meant to stay locked in vaults. Some truths refused to die. And Olivia Marsh, once invisible, once forgotten, had dragged one of the world's darkest secrets into the light. The shadows would take years to clear. The scars would linger. But the silence that had protected corruption for decades was broken. And truth, once unearthed, never went quietly back underground. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next chapters and new releases on the channel. Make sure to check out the other videos and stories waiting for you here. There's plenty more to dive into. And if this episode kept you on the edge of your seat, share it with friends so they can experience it too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.